as an industry, let's try to figure out ways of not having the problem be a problem with generative AI, with the innovation. They're going to continue focusing on surfacing more and more security issues. They will be disrupted. Interestingly, generative AI actually puts the existing security products in the best position to innovate and get ahead.
Welcome to the third episode of Seeding AppSec. I'm here with my co-host, Nir Valtman, and our guest today, Teja Myneedu from Navan. Before we get started, I would love to have you do a little bit of an intro, Teja, on who you are, a little bit on your background, and then we can dive in on today's topic.
Thanks, Simon. Teja Myneedu, I lead product security at Navan. Was at a few large and small companies here in the Bay Area and actually in the Midwest too before this. And have been a security practitioner almost all my life, and accidentally switched into management and decided there's enough interesting things there, I guess, to learn and grow as well. And so continuing to be here mostly because I'm fortunate to work with a lot of very smart people who keep me on my toes, and leading teams and seeing their impact is great. But I still enjoy going deep into application security, infrastructure security, and all other parts, detection and response, the technology behind it, and seeing how things are evolving.
Excellent. Well, today's topic, we're going to be talking about finding, evaluating, and implementing innovation in your AppSec practice, which I'm very excited to be a bit of a fly on the wall for this one. But before we dive in, Teja, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your journey in security. You mentioned you were a practitioner for a long time. You've moved into management, but maybe give us a little bit of your origin story of how you ended up in security in the first place and how you progressed from there.
Yeah, it's a story about how someone pulled me into thinking security was cool, I guess, or basically there's a guy, and I grew up in India, so this is a well-known fact, at least people who are from India. There was a guy who had these books around ethical hacking, and it was like a super big figure in like him on newspapers. And he made hacking seem cool, I guess, at least made it seem like there was some sort of mystery to it. And then I started taking cryptography classes, was not great at learning them. Also, I think the material around teaching cryptography wasn't great back then. But really, I pursued that. I did my master's at Iowa State. I landed up from India straight up in Iowa. And fortunately, I was okay because I didn't, I guess, have too many expectations watching Hollywood movies about like how Iowa looks like. But a lot of my friends were disappointed. That's a side story. But really did my master's and then ended up in information security, and then ended up trying to find a job, which was really hard around the 2008, 2009 period. And the only company that would hire me and let me be on a visa was Union Pacific Railroad in Omaha, Nebraska. So it was very fun beginnings. I guess I chose between a software developer job at IBM in the Bay Area and the security job in Omaha, Nebraska. And people were like, "Are you crazy? Like, this job is paying you more. It's Bay Area, it's California." And I was like, "Well, I want to do security." And this is that opportunity I've been waiting for forever, right? So that's where I ended up getting into actual security, and realized how it's very different from what I had imagined, but still very fun. So I ended up continuing there.
That is an awesome origin story. And I'd have to say, I've spent like an inordinate amount of time actually in Iowa. I would travel there in college for track and field, and then I was working in the managed security services space, which brought me to Iowa more than you would think, but quite a bit. So
it's a good place. I don't think a lot of people realize that. I guess I tell a lot of my friends who went to like USC or NYU for school, and I tell them, hey, you haven't seen the real America yet. I have. Like I've lived in the Midwest and like been in other places. Not a lot of people
Not the
have.
Chicago Midwest, the real Midwest.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, man, there's so much going on right now in security, and I would say just across the board. It seems like every 1 to 2 years there's sort of a new buzzy term: shift left, CASB, passwordless. Now we're in it with Gen AI. How do you identify what is real and what is not in terms of security innovation?
Yeah, mostly there's two aspects to it, right? One is I'm evaluating that question in my current context of like the organization I'm working in as my what I'm doing in my day job, and the other aspect of it is generally speaking how are things evolving, right? And the answer is slightly different for each of those. At my day job, I'm usually applying it to the context of like, hey, what works in my context, my organization's context. But a lot of times I spend a lot more time looking at the other piece of it, which is, hey, what trends are emerging? And I usually ask three questions, right? What problem is it solving, right? And I am able to go, I guess, deeper into what problem it's solving because I've looked at that problem from a couple of different contexts. And more importantly, I do have, again, a great group of, colleagues, friends who I constantly discuss with their problems, right? And my problems look different from their problems. So when I'm listening to that problem statement, I'm truly asking a follow-up question, right? The second question is how many people have the same problem, right? Like across different organizations and different contexts, how many people have the same problem or a flavor of that problem, right? And that matters when you're thinking about that innovation. Hey, what flavor of the problem maybe you're solving as well? And finally, I usually look at what their vision is. And this sort of ties together the first two questions. When I hear someone who's actually trying to solve a problem describe their vision for it, it kind of gives me a sense of how well they understand the problem they're solving, what choices have they made in determining what flavor of the problem they're solving, and who are they solving for, right, in the persona. So that usually tells me about the understanding of the problem, and what it tells me more is sort of how they're pushing the boundaries on the existing body of knowledge, right? Sometimes, I actually not sometimes, like almost in every case that I'm seeing these days, most products are able to copy features off of each other pretty quickly, and the ones that I see end up winning are the ones who actually are pushing that boundary on that body of knowledge a little bit. And that I think is the key to success in the long term.
Having just come back from Black Hat, I can definitely attest to the similarities between the hundreds of dashboards as you walk through the conference floor. So, but anyway, I digress.
I think that it's, the questions that you ask while you look at the world of problem. I really like that. You come from what is the problem that I'm trying to solve, and then you seek for a solution. And, sometimes those solutions can end up with getting a vendor to solve it for you. And sometimes those solutions can be something internal that you can do in your own company. How do you make a decision whether you want to solve it internally or you want to get a vendor to solve it for you? I mean,
I fundamentally believe in buying over building if I can. And my belief there is, and the if I can part is very important, right? And I'll get into the nuance of that. I think if there is a problem that I'm solving, which is common across the board, I think a vendor is in a better position to solve that problem, just given how they are incentivized to and focused on that problem and incentivized to go much deeper on that problem, right? The only variable there, which is the hardest, is the flavor of the problem I'm talking about. Like in my context, do I have a unique set of organizational variables, technology choices, which don't have generally a good solution across the board. So the things vendors, I guess, are not incentivized to build are things which are very esoteric. I don't think, static analysis tools may be focused on OCaml as a language if I have OCaml as a problem, as a main problem in my organization, right? So things like that where I tend to look at those variables, which matter quite a bit when I move from a POC phase to actual adoption phase. And then I start discovering the edges of the product where it doesn't do well. So that's my decision-making process. Usually I think if there's a problem worth solving, there's a business that's being built around it. And it's a matter of finding that business. But if that version of the problem isn't big enough to be solved, then that's my problem, and I try to build solutions around it.
Okay, so let's say you network with people. Obviously, that's how I met you. You have, you're a member of multiple professional groups, and at the end of the day, you speak with people about the problems that you want to solve. How do you find the ways to solve those problems?
That's a very good question. The ways to solve those problems, first of all, I think I have some solutions in my mind, right? In a sense that before I even start talking to a vendor, I want to first sit down and figure out what makes sense for me, right? Like what is the actual problem in my organizational context, and how would I solve it if it were me, right? So that's I think that sets the tone for what sort of am I looking for. And I try not to, when I talk to peers in my professional groups, not to influence their answers when I'm asking the questions. By defining my vision for it, I keep my vision to myself. I just try to keep things open-ended and ask people, hey, who have you seen in the space, who's good, who's bad, find opinions, right? And yeah, and like I said, once I find a set of people and set of vendors and go talk to them, first, if they align with my vision, that's good. If they do things differently from my vision and they actually have a cooler version of the solution than I could imagine, or any of my team members could imagine, that's great, right? Like I think that's like, okay, this is really pushing the boundaries on what we could imagine with all our knowledge so far of the industry, of all the existing tools. You came up with something which was previously not thought of or not known. And on top of it, you have, I guess, not just the next step or like one cool feature, you have your vision defined around it. I think that would make a huge difference for me to say, hey, this is pretty cool. I think we should actually look at it seriously.
You mentioned something very interesting, and that's also tied to how I made certain decisions on buying products in the past, or building products, whatever that made sense. You mentioned that you look at that solution and you look at the vision, and maybe in many cases when you have a problem in the context of innovation, right? It's fairly new problem that you have that you want to solve. Sometimes there are vendors in the space. Sometimes there is an open source in the space. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, most solutions will not be fully baked to your needs. And you mentioned the vision that is important. So when you bring like an innovation project, what are the most important pieces for you? I understand that vision is like how you want to solve it long term, but how do you look at, hey, I need to solve something tomorrow?
I think you answered part of the question. Right? I need to solve something tomorrow. I think that's one, like, first thing. Like, I need to solve something tomorrow, like as soon as possible, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the whole problem, but I need to solve a piece of the problem, because part of my role is making sure I show my organization value. I'm actually reducing risk in my organization as soon as possible. And one of the challenges with most products I've seen, I guess, especially sometimes in the early stages, is that time to value is a little longer. And especially with application security products, it could be I mean, we've seen the trend of, all the application security tools creating more work than actually creating value instantly. And it's always, hey, you adopt a solution, it takes some time for you to actually sift through the false positive or tune the solution or give it more context or do whatever it takes. And eventually 3 months down the line, you get real results. Now, it's very easy for security practitioners, actually, if people are smart about their pitch and their spin, they might say, oh, look, how many things you found, right? And people may not see through the fact that what they're telling everybody is, look how much work we're doing, but we're not like really getting any results. And I think most people have started to see through that, right? Most people are like, okay, you spent 3 months, but what is the outcome? And that's the hard question to answer. So biggest one is, hey, how quickly can I start getting value out of it? And, and at that point, it is the rate of acceleration, right? Okay, we can start somewhere with a certain velocity, quarter over quarter, how much more am I able to get through that? So I like, you're right. Every solution has to be customized to my problem set. But I think I expect there's a set of baseline things you may be able to do out of box, which are able to provide value immediately, and ideally with fewer cycles from my team or from like actually even sister teams like SRE teams or some of the developer pipeline teams, because it's hard enough for my team to spend like three weeks or 4 weeks to get something off the ground. If I have to get time from those other teams, I think this is an organizational reality for many people. It's a lot of, hey, persuading them to do something, by the way, which is not product facing or externally facing, right? So those teams are like, hey, I have more important things to do. There's engineering that I need to support. Security comes sort of later in that list. And so, yeah, how time to adoption, time to value.
That's such an interesting point in AppSec specifically, right? Because I think that speaking of a buzzy term, shift left. So I think for the last handful of years, we've seen all of these vendors come out with their shift left solution. But what we weren't being, I think, honest about was it was work that was being shift left. It was effort that was being shift left. And so now you have these developers who are saying, don't shift left, but if you can shift automation and mitigation and ease left, that obviously is a completely different dynamic between the AppSec and the development team. It's a great call out. Teja, when you're thinking about maintaining innovation in your AppSec practice, where do you look? Where do you avoid? Is it conferences? Is it publications? Is it peers? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I've it's hard for me to, I guess, clean some of the information through conferences. So I've actually stuck to mostly peers. I do go to conferences just to see what's out there. But the reason why I go, even though I may miss a set of things, go with recommendation from peers is because, again, it's sort of a curated list, right? They're probably vetted a set of products, and I do the same for all my peers too. When I go through evaluations, I try to help them out and tell them about everything that I've learned about a set of products and where their strengths and weaknesses are. Obviously with a grain of salt that, hey, maybe I've looked at this like 1 or 2 years ago and things have changed over time. But that's been my go-to over the past few years.
Are there any conferences that you've decided, hey, I can't let this one go because it's just too good?
Yeah, I like the smaller ones these days. I guess, like, besides SF is a good one. It's actually very close to me. I can leave home and be there in an hour or so. So those and peer conferences. And actually, I should mention apart from those, I've been looking at a couple of newsletters, which have been pretty useful. So there's a couple of good AppSec newsletters. There's a couple of good cloud security or infrastructure security newsletters, and one market detection response ones. Of course, there's a lot of cybersecurity newsletters and podcasts. And obviously, again, it's hard to catch up with everything. So I have a few which I try to religiously follow as well, and that's a good social information.
Who's getting the shout out?
Who's getting the shout out? Clint Kibler is getting the shout out. Sandesh, my friend, is getting the shout out. It's like both AppSec focused, I guess, or product security focused. And then CloudSec lists. Ross Selyuk actually is like writes most from a product standpoint. I think that's one interesting one to discover the product side, but also he speaks about things that I generally have thoughts around them, and I hear him and I'm like, oh, his thoughts are more well formed than this. Like and the reason why it's also interesting is because I think a lot of us are security practitioners and we understand the problem inside out. It feels like he's bringing in the mindset of generally, hey, how are products built and how security as a field or security products as a field are maybe not very mature compared to, some of the products which are consumer facing or like, better enterprise solutions.
Nir says the same thing about my thoughts. When he hears my thoughts, they're better formed.
Yeah, I agree with everything.
I guess that's like, I honestly believe, right? As a practitioner who turned into a manager, I was like, I sometimes feel like maybe I should have been less of a practitioner. I should stop, I should forget about what I know. And I should truly focus about, hey, the customer side or the user side of the problem. Right? It's sometimes hard to do that when you know all the details.
What I did during COVID, obviously there are in virtual conferences, it was a bit challenging for me to get through virtual conferences. And obviously face-to-face wasn't an option. I did read through newsletters, part of them you mentioned. And one of the things that I did at that time, and I believe that it's still valuable, is, from time to time, I reached out to a peer in my network, someone that I didn't speak for a while or someone that I didn't speak with at all, that I know that other connections trust that individual. And I just had, let's talk 30 minutes, 30, 45 minutes. Let's just chat about, one-on-one, what are the challenges that you're trying to solve? The things that you typically see in a conference and speed dating, but, maybe one or two of those in a month with people that, just expand your network and you just discuss privately what are the things that you want to solve. And that's how, at least I got also a lot of hey, I didn't even know that there's a problem. Should I start asking those questions? And especially I think it was very beneficial when I spoke with people in the same industry as well. So I was in financial services and I found peers in financial services because, there are very similar problems in that space that are very specific. And therefore, that's kind of how I've got some value out of this.
Yeah. I think that's super valuable for us as practitioners, right? Because you might end up in a different organization in 2 years time frame, and you think you know everything about how to solve a set of problems, and then you're like, okay, at least if you're good about understanding the context and not dictating solutions, you go in and you say, oh, this is a different version of the problem, and I don't know how to solve this version completely yet.
Awesome. Again, we just wrapped up security summer camp in Vegas, and it was a zoo. There's so many people working on security innovation right now. You mentioned a little bit about your framework that you use, but when you're talking to a vendor or a builder, what are some of the strategies you use to separate, the cream of the crop?
Yeah, I think I'm looking at mostly as things are coming up, right? The ways in which our field is being modified, I guess, because of some of the solutions. And when I say they're being modified, of course, you can have completely out there ideas as well, but modified in ways which seem very obvious to you. Again, going back to the same sort of thread around how is someone's version of a solution much cooler than what I could ever think of, right? I think that's what it comes down to, because when I start hearing about some of these solutions, they're talking about exactly the same set of things that I've also already had thoughts about, that, hey, I wish I didn't have this, I could do this slightly better. And they're coming up with a solution which is actually exactly, hitting the nerve on, oh, like, this is actually a better way. Like, they're talking to me about a solution which I could only imagine until this point, and they're taking it 2 steps forward, right? And I've not actually heard anyone describe that before in that way, right? I think that to me is the set of solutions which captivate me the most, and I try to look deeper in them, and often I've found it, very interesting to go deeper there.
So let me ask you another one there. So you're basically saying, when a builder or a company is able to convince you that there's a better way than even the way that you've thought of, that is really indicative that they have like another level of understanding of the problem, and you're willing to engage with them. Question to you would be, when you get sort of bought into this new philosophy that a vendor might be driving, how do you then go about either evangelizing or sharing or testing that philosophy internally within your team?
First, like you said, right? I think evangelizing the philosophy itself, I think that's what I start with, right? Because that's the easiest, very very clear. Hey, here's a better way of doing this. I just found out that there we could do something this way, right? I'll talk about an example, right? Which is very common in application security sort of spaces, where visibility into what the state of security is. The most common question I get, I guess, especially from leadership, is, hey, how are we doing on the risk? How can you show me what the risk is, what the state of the risk is last year versus this year? And this can be answered in hundreds of different ways. I think at that point, it's more art than science for most security leaders, right? Like application security leaders. Like, everybody has their way of defining things that way. Making that art a little easier, I guess, or like making it like a little more sciencey, is actually maybe a good sort of thing that I can say, hey, look, we've been doing this art in a certain way, but I just found out that this vendor is able to define some of these things, which make it a little more empirical in terms of what we're measuring, and a little more meaningful when we do it quarter over quarter. Another problem is how we're giving signal to developers. I really wish we could meet them where they work, right? I've always felt that in the last 10 years or so, there was enough maybe business and money to be made in developer tooling for developers and security tooling for security people. But I think it's like now where those spaces are getting a little more saturated. So it's getting to developer tooling for security people, right? I think that's maybe something. I'm not saying that there's no innovation at all, but I think it's maturing. Hey, like, how can we do developer tooling? Actually, security tooling for developers, right? And then also developer tooling for security folks. So both of those spaces are going to be, I think, very interesting.
That's super interesting. And you mentioned something that on one hand, of course, you need to report on, which is how do you massage the risk, and how do you make it as easy as possible to show the trend and the worth of that investment in terms of, let's say, risk reduction. On the flip side, you mentioned developer tooling or security tooling, and vice versa. And I wonder, maybe we'll take an example, okay, where I see quite a lot of that coming back as a question, or actually coming back as a question after they understand that the question wasn't asked enough. And the main thing is, maybe an example would be, think about IDE tools that are security products, right? Security products. They can be your SAST, your SCA, your secret scanner, whatever it is, that you can just plug it in as an extension and you have it. Now, thing is that many, if not most, of those plugins essentially report on everything that is vulnerable, and but they report it on the client side, if we can call it client side, on the developer workstation. So let's say that you provided this type of capability where you see that mix. how would you know that the tool made a positive impact on the developer side without involving you? Meaning, obviously, if there's a pull request, you can review it. But how do you know if they introduced a vulnerability and then fixed it?
I don't know. No, I'm joking, because I think that's one of the hardest problems, generally speaking, that someone who's in a leadership position in security has, right? And it's sort of
a bad problem in a sense that if you do a good job of actually not making security issues be present in code, you'd make it disappear, then it's harder for you to explain what you've done, because, hey, it never existed, right? So I think that's actually why most of the security products that have been built in the last several years are truly incentivized to show more data around what's wrong than actually being able to address what's wrong, right? This is actually a real problem in the industry, in the sense that our industry as such has to move away from that mindset and being able to measure that value, right? First of all, I think there is a way to get signal from that as well, right? Even if you're running a tool in the IDE, I think it's easy to, but I won't say it's easy, but I think there's ways of essentially getting some telemetry out of, hey, this was a behavior change that was observed as a result of this, and just track that behavior change, right, over time. And that truly is shift left, in a sense that things have been addressed before they even made it into a Git repository, right? So how can you get any better than that in shift left? But more importantly, part of the messaging, and this is deliberately a slow sort of mindset shift over time that I have for my leadership is, hey, let's try to figure out how to do prevention a lot more, right? Even though I'm saying shift left, even though I'm saying we're doing all of these, we're truly still incentivizing actually creating a problem and fixing it. And as an industry, let's try to figure out ways of not having the problem be a problem in the first place, right? And interestingly, I think this is personal thoughts on innovation and in industry, right? With generative AI, with the innovation, if the incumbents by incumbents, I mean all the existing security products, they're going to continue focusing on surfacing more and more security issues, they will be disrupted. Interestingly, generative AI actually puts the existing security products in the best position to innovate and get ahead, right? Because they have the most training data across the board for all types of issues. And if they're able to drive their products to actually reduce that ahead of time and actually not have the issues be issues, that's table stakes. That's where they should be going. But if they're going to continue innovating in that space and not thinking of that, right now the generative AI is not, I guess, that great. But 3, 4, 5 years down the line, I think enough companies will get hands off on enough training data to say, hey, we're just going to rewrite on commit and make sure it disappears, right? And I know you guys do some pretty cool stuff on rewriting on commit and things like that. So that I'm glad there's some interesting ideas there.
Okay, I have to tell you something. I just have to give you a point. You mentioned about changing developer behaviors. And it's not a security topic, but one of the, when, obviously I speak with security practitioners, but I also speak with engineering leaders. And one of the recurring topics, that are coming from engineering leaders is, can you show me the top offenders, or can you show me the top offenders and defenders? And I don't know if you read Freakonomics by any chance, but there's all three. So there's a story, and I have to tell that because it really tells about how the measurement can become essentially a hack for the ones that are being measured. So, for example, there was one story where the Indian government identified that there are too many cobra snakes, and there was an incentive that if you bring the snake head, you get paid for it. And what happened is that the result was that there were actually more cobra snakes in India. And the reason is because people were motivated to have farms of cobra snakes. And that just changed the behavior. So the same way, if you look at that from like an engineering standpoint, if you start measuring developer productivity, or the ones that maybe not only the top offenders, which is very easy, it's more of a wall of shame, but also the top defenders, I can claim that I can create an issue and then solve it, create an issue and solve it. So I'll be a top offender and defender. And that can kind of shift a bit the measurements that we're looking at. I don't know if it makes sense to the context, but
No, you're absolutely right. Right? Again, I mean, I think people feel developer empathy. Like I know I personally had this misconception that developer empathy is maybe translating things better, and that's true. That's part of it is true, because security teams are not great at translating their worldview of 100 issues into, hey, upgrade this one library and this will take care of 100 things. I think that's a common translation problem a lot of us have, and the number of people I've coached on that on my teams to say, hey, think of it from the developer perspective. That's great. But what takes it one step further is, hey, maybe just give them a merge request. And that's already happening right? And then one step even further is, and that's what I heard from you and a couple of other people, is can we make it not be a problem in the first place? Can we actually just let them do their thing? Because true developer empathy is realizing, and I guess if you're actually on a developer team, you realize that you're responsible for not just the product functionality, the quality, UX. Security actually is the hardest, because if you have to do the functional requirements, and the non-functional requirements are like performance, quality, UX, they still blow up in your face and customers are complaining if some of those go wrong. And security, if someone is complaining, it's too late, right? So like that's why, from a security perspective, developer empathy is not being that tense thing where no customer is complaining, but you're internally complaining about it. How can we actually make it so that it's not a problem in the first place, maybe? And then one step further, if it is a problem and they have to act, let's make it as easy as possible, right? I think that's where we need to truly get to.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna round out here. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the security innovations that you're tracking right now? You've maybe alluded to a few that have you most excited, and are there any areas that you feel are largely smoke and mirrors and not really representative of real innovation in space?
I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? And most of them are narrowly focused, I think, in a sense that like there's a lot of solutions I say which are like, hey, I'll like build the secret detection. And like most security leaders, my problem is I don't want a solution per a narrowly defined problem, right? And the ones which excite me the more are the ones which who are thinking about not just like part of it is a technical, hey, static analysis or like software composition analysis as a problem, but are truly thinking about that problem in the context of an organization and then pushing the boundaries on how that has solved, right? That's being solved. So for example, I think a lot of the most innovative products in application security are trying to be, instead of solving a vertical, trying to be a solution which solves developer problems or which prevents security problems in general. And part of it is that realization of how quickly are they able to integrate? Is it a click of a button a day or two, right? And then how well are they presenting that data at different stages, right? And I mean, I again, like I like what you guys are doing with some of the workflows. The workflows are some of the things that I've always wanted. I've built this personally as internal tooling because no tool existed. Like a couple of years ago, we built this internally. And what I mean by workflow problem is I find a bug in a code repository and I need to route it to the right person. And the chances of me getting that problem addressed exponentially reduce the longer I wait from from the time the problem is created, right? And the amount of work I need to do and they need to do exponentially increases the longer I wait. So I think the challenges like that, I wish there was like an easy way to identify, hey, this is the person responsible, tell them what the fix is, fix that, right? I've seen what there showed me in the past, and I know it's been more than a few months, and that's pretty exciting. There's a couple of runtime visibility solutions, I guess, which again have a different lens into, hey, what's actually a problem? And this is actually the antithesis of that shift left, right? Like, let's actually see if something is really in production, really being exploited, really not necessarily being exploited, but is really a problem. And that's where we can say doing this prioritization better. So the good products, I feel, are solving the prioritization problem, which is, I think, one of the most important problems in AppSec. They're solving the user experience problem, where it's not just, hey, I found these issues. How are you truly driving the remediation, right? And so the user experience piece of that. And I guess part of the user experience is that remediation problem. Hey, how can we make it so that people, it's not a problem in the first place, so the prevention problem, and solving it in ways that have not been done before, which is, hey, let's alert 10 times, or let's find new ways of alerting and push new things into, right? I think those are all tried and tested methods. What I'm seeing as innovation is more help, more real-time help, more proof that something is wrong than, hey, I just found this one line which says it's wrong, right? So I think those are all positive trends.
Interesting point on the remediation. When you have connectivity to Git repos, obviously you can see the commit. If you have that context, of course. But what we noticed is that when we look at companies that are a bit older than 5 years, or have at least 5 years of history in their Git repositories, we noticed that actually there's more than 60% of those issues that the author of the commit is no longer in the company. So it's not that you can just, for the people that work in the company, that, hey, you introduced that thing. And if you're in the company and you're still in the context of that project, then fine, you can potentially fix it. But when it comes to employees that are no longer in the company, then you kind of need to find your arms and legs and figure out who are the right people to run the problem to, which ties to one of the challenges that you mentioned. Just interesting data point that we kind of noticed.
Yeah. I mean, the even if you're in the company, I hardly remember code I wrote like maybe 10 years ago. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to solve some of the older ones. And to be honest, I think those are all the solutions that claim, we'll create a merge request and it'll you just have to merge it, right? Where we're literally taking you to that step. And if all your tests pass, it's good. I think most of us realize that the test cases possibly do not cover everything, and the most meaningful upgrades are probably your framework upgrades, or let's say larger libraries. And every time you upgrade them, they have problems, right? So yeah, it's the context and being able to figure out what actually will break when it changes. Those are definitely the hardest problems. And then on top of it, finding the right person to do it.
So, we made a promise when we kicked the podcast off that we would not be pitching Arnica on Seeding AppSec. But if in the rebroadcast there's like a big neon sign behind Teja with the Arnica logo, don't blame me. Let's jump into the lightning round. Teja, if you were the leader of an anonymous hacker group, which I'm assuming you're not today, what would it be called?
That's easy. That I've always used the same, I guess, hacker name. Nobody knows about it because I've actually, like you said, never done anything like that. It would be called Deja Vu in lead speak.
Wow. With a T, Deja Vu.
No, yeah, I guess like I would call it, T3JA, right? Like the lead speak version of it.
Nice.
I love it. Okay, how do you take your coffee?
It's changed over the years. I used to only drink sweet coffee. I didn't know about black coffee. I still don't drink black as much. So, but I am a fan of cold brews these days. So I've been doing nitro cold brews.
So you don't sleep much, and you just get the coffee.
No, I'm surprisingly I'm immune to coffee, and like I can drink coffee and sleep in the next hour.
Even the cold brew.
So I drink it because I like the taste of it, but not because I need it. Like I can go days without drinking coffee, and I'll be okay.
I'm jealous. What advice would you give a young, aspiring security professional?
So security, I guess I should definitely separate out first the technical and maybe not as technical aspects, right? So there's definitely a lot of security professionals who are not deeply technical. And I think they're super, super valuable to the security industry. You don't have to really, know binary code and all the details. They bring a lot of value to how security practitioners view the world and how that should change a little bit. So for them, it would be like, hey, don't be afraid to ask questions. You're still bringing a lot of values. The way they should learn is by, again, looking at the big picture, understanding, people who are working in it and still asking the questions around that, right? Even though some security practitioners might be curmudgeonly about providing answers because they think they're elite. They're not. And for the security practitioners, the biggest advice really is there's a lot of security training material, security focused, like learning and advice and all of that. I think the better security professionals I've met are always more curious about the underlying technology and underlying trends and the bigger picture of how technology is evolving and then understanding security in that context. So I would definitely encourage people to spend more time understanding the underlying how technology works and how industry is moving and how products are moving.
Excellent. Teja, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been such a great pleasure, and I learned a ton. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me.